I was an Orthodox Jew. My entire life was dedicated to God, but a heart attack introduced me to the Messiah my own faith taught me to reject. Before the pain, before the light, there was the routine. My life was a well-worn book, each day a familiar page. From the outside, it probably looked perfect. I owned a small shop filled with sacred texts, the air thick with the scent of old paper and ink. It was more than a business. It was my world. My name, Aaron, carried weight in our community. I was seen as a man of faith, a pillar. I had a wife, Sarah. 40 years we'd been married. Her love was as steady as the morning sun. We had 2 children, both grown, both following the path we'd laid for them. Friday nights were the best. The whole family around the Shabbat table, the smell of challah bread, the candlelight dancing in my grandchildren's eyes. I had everything a man was supposed to want. I had respect. I had family. I had God. Or so I told myself. But I had a secret. A deep, quiet one that I barely admitted to myself. At night after the evening prayers when Sarah was asleep, I'd sit in the dark of our living room and I'd feel empty. It was a hollowness no amount of prayer or ritual could fill. I did everything right. I followed every law, every tradition, down to the smallest detail. My life was a fortress of devotion built stone by stone. But inside that fortress, I was alone. I remember one night looking in the mirror. The man looking back at me wore the kippah, had the beard, he looked the part. But his eyes were tired. They were searching for something they'd never found. I was speaking all the right words to God, but it felt like I was shouting into an empty room. There was no answer, just silence. A profound, deafening silence. Sarah would sometimes catch me staring off into space. She'd put her hand on my arm, her brow furrowed with worry. "Aaron, is everything all right?" Her voice was always so gentle. I'd force a smile and nod, just thinking, I'd say. How could I tell her? How could I tell the woman who saw me as her spiritual rock that I felt like I was standing on sand? That was my life. A performance. I played the part of the devout husband, the wise father, the faithful man of God, and I played it well. I fooled everyone, even my own family. But the truth is, I was starving. I was spiritually starving to death in the middle of a feast. I was dying of thirst while standing by a well. I just didn't know how to drink. I thought the ache in my soul was a test of faith I was failing. But what was coming wasn't a test. It was an answer. An answer to a question I was too afraid to even ask. The week it happened, it started like any other. The bells on my shop door jingled. Customers came and went. The rhythms of my life played their familiar tune. But something was off. A low hum of anxiety under the surface of everything. I told myself it was just business stress. The end of the month was coming, that's all. But the signs were there. I just chose not to see them. The first one came on a Tuesday. I was reaching for a heavy volume of the Talmud on a high shelf. A sharp, hot pain shot down my left arm, so intense it made my fingers go numb. I almost dropped the book. I leaned against the shelf, breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked around. No one had seen. I rubbed my arm, chalking it up to a pinched nerve. Just getting old, Aaron, I told myself, that's all it is. But a cold knot of fear had already started to form in my stomach. Then things got strange. That night I had a dream. I was standing in a desert, a vast empty place under a sky with 2 suns. I was desperately thirsty, my throat like sandpaper. In the distance, I saw a well. I ran towards it, my legs heavy, my lungs burning. But when I got there and looked down, there was no water. Just a perfect, dark reflection of my own face staring back, his eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't comprehend. I woke up in a cold sweat, the feeling of that profound thirst still clinging to me. The next day, the physical feeling came back. I was sitting in my favorite chair after dinner, listening to Sarah talk about our grandchildren, and there it was again. Not just in my arm this time, but a heavy pressure in my chest. It felt like a giant hand was squeezing my heart. I couldn't catch my breath. Sarah noticed my face had gone pale. "Aaron? Are you listening?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I forced a smile. "Yes, dear. Just tired," I lied. I'd lied to my wife, because telling her the truth would make it real, and I wasn't ready for it to be real. What she didn't know was that in that moment, the silent room I always shouted to God from suddenly felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in on me. But what happened the next afternoon was what truly terrified me. I was alone in the shop. It was quiet, that late afternoon lull before closing. I was looking out the window, watching people walk by, when the pressure in my chest returned worse than ever before. It felt like fire. The room started to spin. My vision blurred at the edges, and the sounds of the street faded into a dull roar. I gripped the counter to keep from falling, my knuckles white. I was convinced this was it. This was the end. And in that moment of pure panic, a single thought, a single name echoed in the desperate silence of my mind. A name I had been taught was a curse. A name I hadn't dared to even think in decades. I thought it was just a bad day. I had no idea it was my last day, as the man I used to be. What do you think? Is it possible for God to send warnings before something life-changing happens? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever had an experience that you couldn't explain, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell because the stories I have to share will show you that you are not alone. It was just after 3 in the afternoon. The sun slanted through the front window of the shop, catching dust motes dancing in the air. I remember the smell of old paper and leather, a scent that had been the backdrop of my entire adult life. I was straightening a stack of prayer books, my hands moving with a familiar practiced rhythm. The bell over the door was silent. The street outside was quiet. And in that quiet it happened. It wasn't like the warnings before. This wasn't a pinch or a pressure. This was a demolition. A white-hot spear of fire shot through the center of my chest and radiated out, down my arm, up my neck, into my jaw. It was an all-consuming agony that stole the air from my lungs. My breath hitched in a ragged gasp. The prayer book slid from my numb fingers, thudding onto the wooden floor. I grabbed the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white, trying to anchor myself to a world that was suddenly tilting on its axis. My vision started to shrink, the edges turning dark and fuzzy, like an old photograph burning from the outside in. The familiar, comforting shop blurred into a swirl of meaningless shapes and colors. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights above me warped into a high-pitched whine that drilled into my ears. I could feel a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my shirt suddenly damp and clinging to my skin. I tried to call for help, to scream, but all that came out was a strangled croak. My legs gave out from under me. The impact with the floor was a distant, dull thud. I felt the cold wood against my cheek. My eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling, at the cracks in the plaster that I'd been meaning to fix for years. Funny, the things you think about. My heart was a frantic drum beating against my ribs. A wild, panicked rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. And in the chaos of my dying body, my mind was screaming one last, desperate prayer. Not a formal one from the books, but a raw cry from the hollow part of my soul. God of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where are you? Don't leave me alone. Not now, but all I heard was the silence. The same deafening silence I'd felt for years, only now it was absolute. It was swallowing me whole. The frantic drumming in my chest began to slow. It faltered like a wind-up toy running out of steam. Thump, thump, thump. The blackness at the edge of my vision closed in completely. The last thing I felt was the cold of the floor. And then, nothing. The pain was gone. The fear was gone. The world was gone. The drummer had simply walked away, and the silence that was left behind was the end of everything I had ever known. What do you think really happens in those final seconds between life and death? Is it just darkness? Or is it a doorway to something else? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story is resonating with you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because what I saw on the other side of that silence is something you won't want to miss. But that nothingness, it didn't last. It wasn't an end. It was a pause, a breath between two worlds. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was humming with a presence I couldn't name. And the darkness began to change. It wasn't the absence of light, but a kind of soft, velvety black that felt like a blanket. And then I felt a gentle pull. Not a force, but an invitation. It was like a string being cut, and I was a balloon, suddenly weightless, rising. I opened my eyes. Except I didn't have eyes, I didn't have a body. But I could see. And what I saw had shattered every idea I ever had about life and death. I was floating near the ceiling of my own shop. Down below on the dusty wooden floor was a man. An old man with a gray beard, wearing a kippah, his face pale and slack. It was me. I was looking down at my own body. There was no pain, no panic. The frantic fear that had consumed me just moments before was gone, replaced by a profound and surreal calm. I just watched, a detached observer, as my life's vessel lay still among the scattered books. My attention wasn't on that scene for long, though, because the room, my little shop, was starting to dissolve. The walls grew thin, transparent. The familiar scent of paper and ink was replaced by something else, something clean and ancient. The world I knew was fading away like a dream upon waking, and I wasn't scared. For the first time in my life, that deep, hollow ache in my soul was gone. In its place was a feeling of coming home. But what happened next was even more beautiful and terrifying. The blackness around me wasn't a void, it was a tunnel, and far in the distance a point of light appeared. It started as a pinprick, then grew into a warm, golden glow that pulled me forward. It wasn't just light, it was alive. It radiated a feeling. A pure, unconditional love that was so powerful it felt like a substance, like I was swimming through an ocean of grace. It knew me. This light, this love, it knew every secret I'd ever kept. Every prayer I'd whispered into the silence, every doubt I'd hidden behind my faith, and it didn't judge me. It just loved me. I was moving toward it, drawn by a force more powerful than gravity. All the questions, all the rules, all the traditions that had built the fortress of my life just melted away. Nothing mattered but getting closer to that light. I had been spiritually starving my whole life, and I was finally heading toward the feast. I didn't know who or what was waiting for me there. I only knew that it was the answer. It was the answer to everything. Have you ever felt a peace so profound it didn't make sense in your circumstances? Share your experience in the comments below. And if you want to know who I met inside that light, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because my next story will change the way you see everything. As I moved toward that light, the feeling of being known intensified. It was like every wall I'd ever built around my heart just crumbled into dust. The shame, the secret emptiness, the years of feeling like a fraud, it was all seen. Not judged, but seen. And in the seeing, it was healed. The light wasn't just something I was looking at. It was something I was becoming a part of. It wrapped around me, flowed through me, and it felt more real than the solid floor of my shop ever had. And then I saw him, or rather I felt him. In the heart of that brilliant golden light was a figure. He wasn't made of flesh and blood, but of the light itself, concentrated into a form that was both human and divine. There was no face I could describe with my earthly eyes, yet I knew his expression. It was one of infinite compassion. It was the look of a father waiting for his lost son to finally come home. There was a joy in his presence that was so profound, it was almost painful to my soul, which had been starved of it for so long. There were no words. There was no need for them. Communication was instant, a flow of pure understanding directly into my spirit. And with that understanding came my life laid out before me. It wasn't like watching a movie. I was living it again all at once. I saw myself as a little boy, crying in the night, and I felt his presence comforting me, even though I didn't know it then. I saw myself at my wedding, standing beside Sarah, and I saw the divine blessing in that moment that I had been blind to. But I also saw the other moments. I saw every time I'd judged another man harshly. I saw every time I'd gone through the motions of prayer with a cold heart. I saw the deep, aching loneliness I tried to hide from everyone, including God, but here was the most shocking part. As I saw my failings, I didn't feel shame from him. I felt his sorrow. He hadn't been angry or distant during those years of silence. He had been right there, grieving with me, waiting for me to just turn and see him. All my religious devotion, all the laws I followed so meticulously, I suddenly understood they were like a finger pointing at the moon. I had spent my whole life studying the finger. I never looked at the moon. My soul cried out, a question that was more a feeling than a thought. Who are you? Who are you that has been with me my whole life? And the answer came, not in a sound, but in a wave of truth that resonated in the very core of my being. It was a name I had been taught to fear, to despise. The name of the one my people had rejected. The light poured his identity into me, and I knew. This was Yeshua, the Messiah, the one I'd read about in the prophecies of Isaiah, the one my own scriptures foretold, but the one my tradition had forbidden me from seeing. The confirmation wasn't intellectual. It was a spiritual explosion. A love so absolute and unconditional washed over me that it felt like my soul was being reborn in a river of fire and grace. Everything I thought I knew was wrong, and everything I had ever hoped for was true. But just as I was being completely consumed by this peace, I felt a new sensation, a pull. A thin silver thread seemed to connect me back to the world of cold floors and dusty books. I didn't want to go. I was home. I was finally home. But the knowledge came with the pull. It wasn't my time. My journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. What do you think? Is it possible to have a deeply held faith your entire life and still be missing the most important part? Let me know your honest opinion in the comments. And if you believe that truth can be found in the most unexpected places, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the story of what happened when I came back to my body is a testament to how one moment can change everything. I fought against that pull. Not with my hands, I had no hands, but with every ounce of my being. No, my soul cried out into the light, please, I want to stay. I'm finally home. I tried to anchor myself in that ocean of love, to hold on to the presence of Yeshua, the one who had answered the silent scream of my life. The thought of returning was an agony. Returning to the pain, to the cold floor, to a life where I pretended to be full while starving to death. It was unthinkable. I had spent a lifetime searching, and I had finally found the end of the search. Why would I ever leave? But his presence didn't let me go. It gave me a reason to return. A final powerful wave of understanding flowed into me. A message that was not a sound, but a purpose imprinted directly onto my spirit. This is not the end for you, it is the beginning. The thought came with a clarity that silenced all my protests. The peace you feel is real. The love you feel is for everyone. Go back. Your family needs to know. Your people need to know. Go and be a witness to the truth you have seen. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a commission. My life hadn't been a failed test. It had been a preparation. And with that final instruction, the silver thread became an unbreakable chain. The return journey was nothing like the gentle ascent. It was a violent compression. I was pulled backward, away from the light, squeezed through an impossibly small opening. The infinite feeling of love and acceptance was stripped away, layer by layer, replaced by the crushing weight of mortality. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sudden, shocking cold. Then came the pain. It hit me like a physical blow, a tidal wave of agony as my spirit was slammed back into its broken, fleshy prison. The first thing I felt was a jolt, a brutal electric shock that arched my back off the floor. Whump. It was like being struck by lightning. A raw, ragged gasp of air scraped down my throat, burning my lungs. My eyes flew open. I wasn't seeing golden light. I was seeing the frantic, sweat-streaked face of a stranger, a paramedic leaning over me. The world came rushing back in a chaotic roar, shouted commands. The wail of a siren growing closer, the cold pressure of hands on my chest. I was back. I was back in the body I had watched fall to the floor. The pain was immense, a fire raging in my chest. But underneath it all, a new feeling was there. The hollowness, the ache that had been my lifelong companion. It was gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable peace. The man who died in that shop was gone forever. The man who woke up on that floor had a new purpose. If you were faced with a truth that would cost you everything you hold dear, would you have the courage to embrace it? Tell me what you would do in the comments below. And if you believe that one encounter can change a person's destiny, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the story of what happened when I tried to tell my wife and my community about Yeshua, that was a battle I never could have imagined. The first coherent thought I had was about the light. It was all wrong. It was a harsh, sterile white that beat down from the ceiling, a world away from the golden, living light I had just left. A steady, rhythmic beeping drilled into my ear, insistent, mechanical. It was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. I smelled antiseptic and something else, fear, the stale, lingering scent of it. My body felt like a lead weight, and every inch of it ached with a deep, throbbing pain. I was back, and the reality of it was a crushing disappointment. I managed to open my eyes. The first thing I saw was Sarah, my wife. She was slumped in a hard plastic chair beside the bed, her head in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking. She looked older than I had ever seen her, her face a roadmap of worry. When she heard me stir, her head shot up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, but when they met mine, a wave of relief so powerful washed over her face that it was like watching the sun rise. "Aaron," she whispered, her voice cracking. She rushed to my side, her hands fluttering over mine, afraid to touch me as if I were a ghost. A doctor came in, a young man with kind but tired eyes. He spoke in calm, measured tones. He used words like massive myocardial infarction, widowmaker, and miraculous. He explained how the paramedics had arrived just in time, how they'd shocked my heart back into rhythm on the floor of my own shop. He said I was lucky. Very, very lucky. Sarah held my hand, tears of gratitude streaming down her face, nodding at the doctor's every word. I just looked at them both. They were talking about the mechanics of my survival, the science of it, but they had no idea. They didn't know that my luck had nothing to do with the defibrillator. They didn't know that my heart had been restarted long before those paramedics ever arrived. The days that followed were a strange kind of purgatory. I was trapped in a weak, recovering body, but my spirit felt like it could fly. The nurses would come in, check my vitals, and comment on my calm demeanor. "You're a model patient, Mr. Cohen," one of them said with a smile. "Most people are a wreck after what you've been through." I just smiled back. How could I explain that the greatest storm of my life had brought the greatest peace? I'd spend hours just staring out the hospital window, watching the clouds drift by. The world looked the same, but it was completely different. It was like I had been colorblind my whole life and could suddenly see every shade, every hue. Everything was infused with a new meaning, a new light. But what happened next was the first sign of how difficult this new life would be. On the third day, Sarah brought a bag from home. Inside were my tuffalin and my sitter, my prayer book. She laid them on the bedside table with a gentle, reverent touch, as she had done 1,000 times before. "I thought you would want these," she said, her voice soft. It was a gesture of love, an attempt to bring my world, our world, back to normal. I looked at the familiar leather straps, the worn cover of the book that held the prayers of my ancestors. A week ago, they were my lifeline. Now they felt like artifacts from another man's tomb. I felt no connection to them. The living water I had tasted made me realize I had been drinking from a dry well my entire life. I couldn't bring myself to touch them. Sarah watched my face, a small frown of confusion forming between her brows. She saw my hesitation. She didn't say anything, but I could feel the first hairline crack forming in the foundation of our world. That night, unable to sleep under the hum of the hospital machines, I knew I had to say something. When Sarah came in the next morning, her eyes still searching mine for the man she knew, I took her hand. It felt frail in mine. "Sarah," I started, my own voice sounding strange and new. When I was gone, I wasn't alone, her brow furrowed in confusion. "The paramedics were there, Aaron. They saved you." I shook my head, my heart pounding. No. Before them, in the darkness, I met someone. I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. The kind of fear you have for someone who has been through a trauma and might not be thinking clearly. She forced a gentle smile. "You were dreaming, my love." The pain, I looked directly into her eyes, and I let the name that was now etched onto my soul come out for the first time. "His name," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "is Yeshua." The change in her expression was instant and devastating. It wasn't just confusion anymore. It was a deep, visceral shock, followed by a shadow of something that looked like horror. It was as if I had confessed to the most terrible betrayal imaginable. The color drained from her face, and she slowly pulled her hand away from mine. In that moment, watching the woman I loved look at me like I was a stranger, I understood. The peace I had found came with a price, and I was only just beginning to pay it. Do you believe it's possible for a single moment of truth to be worth losing everything you've ever known? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear about the storm that broke when I left that hospital and tried to bring this truth back to my family and my community, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. The battle for my soul was over, but the battle for my life had just begun. Leaving the hospital felt less like a homecoming and more like a walk to my own execution. Sarah drove, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. The silence in the car was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered any attempt at conversation. I'd look over at her, at the woman whose every thought I used to know, and see a stranger. Her face was a mask of grief, as if she were driving home from my funeral after all. And in a way, she was. The man she married had died on the shop floor. She didn't know the man who came back. Walking through the front door of our home was the strangest part. Everything was exactly as I had left it, but my eyes were new. The familiar Hebrew blessings framed on the wall, the shelves of sacred books I had spent a lifetime collecting, they looked like props on a stage set for a play I was no longer in. I had spent my entire life believing God lived within the pages of those books, within the walls of our synagogue, within the strict observance of our laws. But I had met him in a place with no books, no walls, no laws. I had met him in the darkness, and he was made of light. How do you explain that to people whose entire world is built on the structure you just left behind? My children came over that first night. David, my practical, serious son, and Leah, my daughter with a heart as soft as her mother's. They hugged me, relief and love in their touch. But then they sat down across from me in the living room, their faces etched with a rehearsed concern. Sarah had told them. Of course she had. David cleared his throat. "Dad," he began, his voice gentle like he was talking to a child. "We spoke to Dr. Evans. He said it's very common, after a trauma like this, for the brain to have experiences, hallucinations. It's a coping mechanism. He was offering me an escape route, a clean medical explanation for the miracle that had redefined my existence. All I had to do was agree, nod my head, blame it on a lack of oxygen, and my life could go back to normal. But I couldn't. The memory of that love was more real than the chair I was sitting on. I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to read from the Torah, and I shook my head slowly. It wasn't a hallucination, David. Leah started to cry, soft, heartbroken sobs. "But Daddy," she whispered, "that name, Yeshua, it's what they use to mock us. It's the name of their God, not ours. How can you say it?" Her words were a knife. I saw it from their side. To them, it was the ultimate betrayal. It was as if I had spit on the graves of our ancestors. I had abandoned my people. But in my heart, I knew I hadn't abandoned God. I had finally found him. The weeks that followed were a slow, painful amputation. Friends from the synagogue would stop by, their visits starting with concern for my health and quickly turning into worried interrogations about my soul. They'd quote scripture to me, trying to prove my experience was a deception, a test from the adversary. But their words were just noise. I had something they didn't. I had the memory of his presence. My new purpose began to crystallize in the loneliness. The words I heard in the light, "Go and be a witness," weren't just a memory. They were a fire in my bones. I wasn't just a survivor of a heart attack, I was a messenger. My mission wasn't to change my religion. It was to introduce my people to the Messiah they had been waiting for, the one I now knew personally. The final break came on a rainy Tuesday. I was sitting in my old leather chair reading a book someone had secretly sent me, a New Testament. For the first time, I read the words of Yeshua, and it was like hearing his voice again. Sarah walked in and saw the book in my hands. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just stopped, and a look of final, dead resignation settled on her face. Her voice was hollow, empty of 40 years of love. "I don't know who you are anymore, Aaron." She said it so quietly, but it was the loudest sound I had ever heard. She was right. I didn't really know who I was either. I had lost my community, my friends, my family's respect, and the love of my wife. I had lost my entire world. But as I sat there, alone in the ruins of my life, I felt a peace that defied all logic. I had lost everything I thought was important, only to find the one thing that truly was. If you found a truth that brought you peace but caused everyone you love pain, what would you do? Would you keep it to yourself, or would you follow it, no matter the cost? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe that a new beginning often looks like a painful end, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the story of how I started to build a new life from the ashes of the old one is a testament to the fact that you're never truly alone. My old life was like a beautiful, ornate house built over generations. It had rules for every room, traditions that polished the floors, and a reputation that stood tall in the neighborhood. From the outside, it was perfect, but I was the only one who knew that on the inside, it was completely empty. I spent 40 years wandering its silent, hollow halls, starving for something I couldn't name. That heart attack didn't destroy my life. It just finally knocked down the door of that empty house and showed me the way out. Today I don't have that big house anymore. I have something much smaller, much simpler. It's more like a single, quiet room. But this room isn't empty. It's filled with a presence. A peace so real, it's like the air I breathe. I learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. Religion can give you a map, but it can't give you the destination. All my life I studied the map. I memorized every road, every landmark. I was a master of the map, but I never met the one who drew it. Now I don't need the map anymore because I walk with him every day. I'm not Aaron, the respected scholar, anymore. I'm not Aaron, the pillar of the community. Most days I'm just Aaron, a man who lost everything. But that's only what the world sees. What I know, and the part of me that no one can touch, is that I'm Aaron, a man who is found. I traded a life of respect for a life of love. I traded the approval of men for the embrace of God, and I would make that trade again 1,000 times over. Because the truth isn't a set of rules you follow, it's a person you know, and once you've met him, nothing else is ever the same. So I have to ask you, what is the one truth in your life that you would be willing to risk everything for? Let me know your honest answer in the comments below. And if these stories of life-changing encounters speak to your heart, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. I have so many more stories to share, stories that prove that even in our darkest moment, we are never, ever alone.